Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Andrew Robinson and I am a recovering audiophile. And if this is your first time to my channel, I would just like to say welcome. Here is where we talk about all things audio, hi-fi, art, design, and music. So hit that like, hit that subscribe button because this is what we do here. And if you are one of my subscribers, if you are one of the OGs, welcome back. And how are you? Hope everyone is sheltering in place, staying safe, and well, let's just get to today's video. Last Friday, I made a video where I pitted the JBL L100 Classic against the Klipsch Heresy Mark IV. And if you haven't watched that video, you should probably go check that out, and I'll link to it in the description below or right up there. Anyway, it wasn't so much the conclusion of that video that garnered the most reaction out of you guys. No, a lot of you took, I don't want to say offense, but took issue with something else that I said in that video. And in that video, I said that I thought that audiophile break-in was bullshit. And that got to some of you. So I thought today would be a great opportunity to discuss that topic. And that's why we're here in my office for one of our fireside chats, because we are going to be talking about audiophile break-in and whether or not it is, in fact, bullshit. Let's get into it. So in response to my comment that I thought that audiophile break-in was bullshit, a number of you sent me links to a study or an article by GR Research, in which the author states that audiophile break-in is in fact not a myth. And full disclosure, I had not seen this article. I had not read it myself. I have since looked at it. I have since read it. In fact, I think I've read it about a dozen times. And I see where a number of you look at this particular study or experiment as quote-unquote proof that audiophile break-in is in fact real. But there's some sentences in the opening paragraph of that study that shows that I think we might be talking about two completely different things. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to actually read the opening paragraph of GR Research's study on break-in and why I think we are arguing two different points. It starts by saying this: obviously, as a woofer is played over a given time period, the suspension compliance changes. The objective data showing changes in the TS parameters as the suspension loosens up does not prove noted subjective differences in the perceived output or how a speaker sounds, but does prove that there is something more taking place than getting used to the sound. That's the opening paragraph in GR Research's article. And I want to make one thing kind of abundantly clear. When I say that I think audiophile break-in is bullshit, I am not saying that I do not believe that electronic devices, speaker cones, just anything that you use on a daily basis doesn't in fact change over time. I'm not arguing that. I'm not debating that. That's obvious, because if things didn't change over time, nothing would ever wear out. Think about that for a second. If you go on eBay right now and you want to go buy a pair of loudspeakers from, say, the 70s, a number of them may need to have their drivers refoamed or replaced. If things don't change over time, why would they need to do that? So, yes, things break in, change, or break down over time. And honestly, that's all GR Research's article or study proved, is that over time, things change. Okay, what was kind of interesting about that article, to be perfectly honest, was just how little things changed. And that over the span of 80 hours of non-musical playing content, we're talking just pure test tones in order to tax the drivers as hard as humanly possible, some of the changes in said drivers were less than 5% over 80 hours, in which I argue, if that was audible, if there was even a way to test that, which he clearly states there wasn't, could you even hear it? Is that much of a difference even perceivable? We don't know. We don't know. And his article goes so far as to state he doesn't know either. So it is a great article that shows the level of change in the physical properties of something over a short, medium, and long period of time. But I just wanted to be clear that I'm not arguing that things don't change over time. I am arguing the phenomenon that over time, inanimate objects, specifically hi-fi components or speakers, magically know to sound better. And why do I say magically know? I say magically know because I have never in 20 years run across an audiophile that after break-in stopped liking their speakers or stopped liking a component. Every component always just gets better. But statistically, that's impossible. That's absolutely impossible, that everything just gets better rather than get worse. And as a result, it begs the question, once again, is it the product getting better, or are we just getting used to the way that it sounds? And the likelihood is that while a product may change over time, it is still our ears, our mind, that is changing and getting used to the product itself. And this is why, for me, I do believe that audiophile break-in is nonsense or overblown. And a lot of audiophile companies or manufacturers may even use it to their advantage for one reason or another. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. But I thought it would be a good idea for me to tell you how I test in order to kind of get around this whole break-in issue. Because full disclosure, back when I started out in this industry, back when I started reviewing, I did believe in audiophile break-in. I did. In fact, you can go back and read some of my reviews from the early 2000s where in the setup section, there's usually a sentence or two in there that states that I installed the product and I let it run in for a matter of days or weeks before sitting down for some critical listening. That's my way of letting the reader know, letting you know that I let it break in a little bit because heaven forbid I listen to a cold product or a cold speaker. And I did believe this. I did believe that that mattered. I did believe that radical changes were afoot every time that I allowed for that to happen. It wasn't until another fellow enthusiast challenged my thinking on the matter by simply stating one very, very simple question. When does an inanimate object know to start sounding better? And why does an inanimate object, especially in hi-fi or audiophile circles, only sound better? It never sounds worse. And I, like many of you that saw Friday's video, or many of you who may be watching this video right now, I went, never thought of it that way. And so I completely changed my review regimen because of that comment, because of that question, that challenge, because I wanted to prove him wrong. But in reality, I ended up developing a new way of thinking for myself. And this is how it goes. When I get a new product, I used to plug it in, set it up, and let it break in. Come back a couple days, maybe even a week or two, sit down and listen, arguably for the first time. So now when I get a new product, I take it out of the box, I set it up to the best of my ability based on years of experience, and I simply have a listen. And I listen to the same 10 tracks, which we've talked about in another video, which I'm also going to link below if you haven't seen that, or check it out right up there. And I use those same 10 tracks because they are near as makes no difference, as close to seared in my audible memory as possible. I have the most experience with these 10 tracks. Now, I know that audible memory is short, freakishly so. Freakishly so. And I don't necessarily want this video to become about audible memory, but just understand that audible memory is measured in seconds. Not in days, not in hours, not even in minutes. It's measured in seconds. And so I try and use things that I'm most familiar with, but I do listen to every product straight out of the box. And I grab my phone or a notepad and I take vigorous notes on what I'm hearing within the first 1 hour of playing back any product. And then I close that book, I close out that notepad, and I don't look at it. I jot down all my initial findings, my initial thoughts, all subjective, of course, and then I put it away. And then I go about enjoying said product, speaker, or whatnot for a period of weeks, never really critically sitting down to evaluate. I just let it live in my house, in my system, and I enjoy all sorts of content on it. Yes, I may finesse placement at that time. I may do little things here and there because I'll notice things along the way that I'm like, oh, I should probably bring that out from the wall. I can push that back a little bit. I can change this setting here and there. But for the most part, I just live with it as you would any other component. And then when I decide that it's time, or we're getting close to the point where I need to sit down and formulate my critical final thoughts on a product, I will sit down over the course of a couple of days, and I will carry out the same listening tests of these same tracks or the same movies. And I will take new notes, never referring back to my originals. And then when it's all done, I literally look at all 3 or 4 pages of notes from the very first to the end, and I see where, if any, differences have sprung up. And what's shocking is there aren't a lot. There aren't a lot of differences from my initial impressions after, say, an hour of listening fresh out of the box to after several weeks, several tens of not hundreds of hours of playback. For me, it was eye-opening. It was rather surprising to be able to compare and contrast my initial thoughts about something and then come back to something weeks later when I normally would not have done that. I normally would have started weeks later, only to realize that my findings, my reactions were all largely the same. Yeah, sure, maybe I took a slightly different note here or there, but again, I can't subjectively or objectively say that that is the speaker or electronics doing, rather than just I've grown a little bit more accustomed to the sound of said product. And this is why when so many people chime in, or I see online, people are like, oh, I took my speaker. I'm going to use speakers as an example, okay? I took my speaker and I put it in a guest bedroom, or I took it down into my basement and I let it play for like a week. I just let it play. Then I brought it back up into my living room and I listened critically, and you know what? After break-in, they were magnificent. Well, when was your first impression? Where was your first impression? The simple act of moving it from one room to the next may have been all the change that loudspeaker needed for you to sound different. That's why there's so little scientific process that goes into the audiophile break-in phenomenon. Because a number of you even commented that, oh, you're wrong. I had this speaker, and after, breaking in and towing it in a little bit, it just changed everything. Well, I argue the toe-in is what changed everything, not so much the speaker breaking in. I'm not doing this. I'm not saying this to pick a fight, and I'm definitely not saying any of this to prove that I'm right. This is just my philosophy and how I look at things. Because if you're going to spend the money, if you're going to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on a component or a loudspeaker, and if you want to go by the arguments put forth by, say, the article by GR Research, that after 80 hours or more, I would rather you buy something and enjoy it during that time. I would rather anyone buy something and enjoy it for 80 hours, because that's a long time. And this is where I think manufacturers use break-in to their advantage. Because a lot of times, especially with loudspeakers, loudspeaker manufacturers are especially guilty of this. Even if they offer you a 14-day or a 30-day in-home trial, a lot of times their own manuals will state that you need several hundred hours of break-in before you are achieving the optimal sound from their product. Do you know how long it takes to put several hundred hours on anything?
Long time. You have no idea.
And I know that that's why a number of people plug something in, put it in another room, and let it play for like 24 hours straight. They just let it play. Well, if you're doing that, if you're racking up all of this time as quickly as possible in order to take advantage of an in-home trial because a product is only going to suddenly magically sound good after 100 hours, and then you bring it into your room in order to listen to it, what are you comparing it to? What did it sound like before versus after? Do you automatically just go straight to break-in? In which case, your after opinion has no basis for comparison. So you don't know what changes there were. In which case, if you do come to the conclusion that after a week of hanging out in your closet playing, music at a certain volume, it's just miraculously better, that's entirely on you. If you're watching this video and you're questioning this, even if maybe you are skeptical or you are a true believer in break-in, the one thing that I hope you take away from this video is this notion that with time, this arbitrary amount of time, everything always improves. It never gets worse. And how statistically that simply is not possible. It's simply not possible for a manufacturer of anything, to say after an arbitrary amount of time that may just exceed the return policy or warranty, is when it's magically going to sound at its best. And that every single time you reach that point, everyone comes to the same conclusion, and that after all that time, it did in fact magically sound its best. I want everyone to think about that for a minute. What is more likely? Because I am not arguing wear and tear. I'm not. That would be silly. And I agree with GR research that over time, things flex, things change, things wear. Everything in life does that. I'm arguing that how does an inanimate object know to sound perfect after a predetermined period of time? And so yeah, that is today's video. I want to know what you guys now think about the argument surrounding audiophile break-in. So sound off in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and be sure to ring the bell because I want you to be notified when new videos come out, because we release new content every week. And that's it. That's all I have. I thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, the only person that has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Stay safe, stay indoors, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.
And for me, being relatively new to this whole audio world, I find it far more possible that it's manufacturer snake oil, so to speak.
Oh, it's all bandwagoning.
To tell somebody, just prepare yourself that you're going to need 100 hours before this thing really kicks in. That just sounds...
It's ridiculous.
It's
ridiculous.
That's somebody in a marketing department that...
Yeah.
It's like, this is how we cover our ass, so to speak, or minimize the returns, Well,
I just think that marketing departments and manufacturers understand that people get used to things. And if you manage the expectation that this thing needs time in order to sound its best, psychologically you know that the odds are people are going to grow into liking said product.
They just get used to it.
They just get used to it, in which case you could make the argument that it did in fact do that. It did in fact get better.
Yeah.
It's just psychologically, with oral memory being as short as it is, the likelihood is you adjusted to it. It did not adjust to you because it doesn't know to adjust to you.
Right.
And that's why statistically, the one thing that busts the audiophile break-in myth is how does an inanimate object know to get better, and why does it only always get better? Nothing ever gets worse in audiophile with break-in. Nothing. And that's why I think it's nonsense. So anyway, that'll be in the outtakes.
Oh, and be polite with your comments.
Be polite with your comments.
We know you're gonna have all the feelings about this.
Feelings, all the very feelings. Hi, Katie. Hey, baby. Hey, babies. How you doing? Did you just eat? Your breath smells like fish farts again. Come here. Come on. Come here. All right, we gotta go.